about how the determining factor for censorship is not what is said, but who says it. So when I say something about how hospitalizations are being exaggerated, that's fake news, that's misinformation, that's dangerous, it's a threat to the public health, we got to censor the guy. But then when the Democrat governor of New York says exactly the same thing, that's good, that's fine, because she's a Democrat. She's a prominent Democrat, and she's not a mean old conservative podcaster. There's a complicating factor here. And this complicating factor is exemplified by Dr. Robert Malone. Dr. Robert Malone is one of the people who invented mRNA vaccine technology. He was an early pioneer on that technology, and even people who disagree with him give him a lot of credit for developing the technology that is now powering most of the vaccines we see around us for the coronavirus. So Robert Malone has gone out and criticized a lot of the public health response to COVID. Notably, he's criticized Dr. Fauci, whom he says has no integrity and lies all the time.
Are cotton and surgical masks effective at preventing the spread of Omicron?
Yeah. When the CDC says they are effective, in fact, they are.
Dr. Malone, that's a lie. Is that not true?
Yes, it's Tony. What can I say? Tony has no integrity. He lies all the time. And me and my peers have been watching this for decades. And we just shrug our shoulders and shake our heads and say it's Fauci.
This is not just some disgruntled scientist or public health official complaining about Dr. Fauci. This has been said widely for decades, since the AIDS epidemic, that Dr. Fauci is a bureaucrat. He's not a great scientist. He's a bureaucrat. The good scientists stay in the lab. The bureaucrats push paper like Dr. Fauci, that all he really cares about is being on TV, that he jumps the gun, that he is incompetent, that he mishandles things. I mean, this is going back decades and decades. Dr. Malone has been censored. He's been kicked off of Twitter. An episode that he did with Joe Rogan is being suppressed by big tech. So what this shows you is it's not just about what is said, because the liberal establishment's totally changed their tune on COVID, on the efficacy of vaccines, on the efficacy of masks. It's not just about what is said, and it's not even just about who is saying it, in the sense that it's not just about the credentials. Often what I would hear when I would push back against big tech censorship in the last couple of years is I would hear, well, Michael, you're making a point that might turn out to be true, but you're not a credentialed scientist. You don't have a degree from some medical school or some epidemiology program. You don't work at the NIH. So even if you're saying the same thing as someone else, you don't have the right to say it because you don't have the credential. But there's nobody more credentialed than Dr. Robert Malone. The guy's got very impressive scientific degrees. He was a fellow at Harvard. He helped to develop the vaccine technology that is at issue right now. But what's the problem? The problem is he's on the wrong side. So it's not just what he's saying. It's not just who he is and his credentials. It's a much more basic political question. Who are his friends? Who are his enemies? Who are his allies? What side is he on? He is right now not on the side of Biden, Fauci, the NIH, the woke corporations, the liberal establishment. He's not on their side. So they're going to shut him up. And it doesn't matter how many degrees he's got, doesn't matter how central his role was to the development of these vaccines. He's out. He's out. So how do we fight back against this? One GOP representative is showing us how to do it. Representative Troy Niels has just submitted a Joe Rogan episode with Dr. Robert Malone into the congressional record. So this episode, these Rogan shows go on forever. And this episode is being suppressed on big tech. So this congressman comes out and he says, okay, I'm going to read it verbatim into the congressional record. Can't censor that, Dorsey, or whoever the new guy is. Agrawal. Can't censor that, Mark Zuckerberg. He says, quote, today I submitted the transcript from the Joe Rogan Experience podcast episode 1757 with Dr. Robert Malone into the congressional record. Big tech wants to restrict your access to this information, but they cannot censor the congressional record for now. But what we're seeing here is really great. It's a reassertion of political rights. And it's kind of weird for the conservatives. and for the right in America. Because for decades we were told by the right and by conservatives, government bad, everything government does is bad, corporations good, everything corporations do is good. But now we're in a situation where we need to turn to the government to protect us against corporations, because the corporations, specifically big tech, are controlling all the speech in our government, in our society. And in self-government, speech is politics and politics is speech. So if they control the speech, they control the whole damn political system. So now we're in this strange position where we're saying, no, help us, big government. Hey, big government, help us against big tech and big corporations. Republicans are partially responsible for giving corporations all this power. We are. And I'm not saying you and me specifically. We're, I'm a little young. I wasn't around during a lot of the battles of the 80s and the 90s. Okay, I was but a glint in my father's eye. Still, Republicans had this idea that as long as you deregulated everything and gave all this power to corporations, you'd be in a better position. And that's not always true. Circumstances and threats change in politics. Sometimes the threat is from big government. Sometimes the threat is from big media. Sometimes the threat is from big bureaucracy. Sometimes the threat is from big corporation. Sometimes the threats change, okay? And a conservative movement that does nothing but repeat brainlessly the same platitudes from 1982 is not going to be very effective. You need to respond to the threats we've got now. And right now, what that means is growing our political power, asserting our political power, using the state, not to put too fine a point on it, to rein in corporations that are selling our country and our rights and our way of life down the river. Speaking of the U.S. Congress and what people are allowed to say, I just read the most disgusting article I think I have ever read in the Associated Press. This is really, really gross. AP News headline, Ashley Babbitt, a martyr? Her past tells a more complex story. Ashley Babbitt is the military veteran who was shot at the Capitol, the January 6th insurrection, the worst attack ever, worse than Pearl Harbor, you remember that? Where conservatives were killing cops. None of that happened. The only person who got killed that day in political violence was this lady, Ashley Babbitt, because of some trigger-happy cop at the Capitol. And the AP comes out and says, yeah, you think she shouldn't have been shot? I don't know, she wasn't a great lady. And what's the evidence? Oh, the evidence was she got in a fight with her husband's ex-wife. Seriously, that's the evidence. They say, Ashley Babbitt, everyone's saying she's like a good U.S. military veteran, but actually she got into a big fight with her husband's ex-wife. So they dig up all this dirt about her personal life and her romantic life, and they say, yeah, because of that, she's bad. She deserved to be shot by a cop. That's the insinuation. They don't say it explicitly, but that is the insinuation. Of course, the left would never do what they are doing to Ashley Babbitt to someone like George Floyd. George Floyd, complete degenerate career criminal, regardless of what you think about how he was killed, if it was justified, if it was murder, as the jury found, but I don't think it's very convincing. Regardless of what you think about this guy was a thug career criminal who never reformed his life, who was committing a crime as he was killed, who was resisting arrest, who had a lethal dose of fentanyl in his system. He was putting himself in a position where things were probably not going to turn out very well for him. If not that day, then into the future. And if you said that, if you mentioned that he robbed a woman at gunpoint, a woman who may have been pregnant. There was some question as to whether or not she was pregnant, but very well may have been. If you bring that up, you're a racist, you're terrible, you're victim blaming, you're doing all sorts of awful things. Michael Brown. Remember Michael Brown? He was the young man in Ferguson, Missouri. He robbed a store and then attacked a cop and grabbed the cop's gun, and the gun discharged, and then Michael Brown was killed in the altercation. You remember that? If you mention any of that, if you mention the fact that Michael Brown started it and was grabbing the cop's gun, you're a racist, terrible, victim-blaming. Daunte Wright. This one's slightly more controversial. Daunte Wright, young man, career criminal, rap sheet a mile long, gets pulled over in a traffic stop. The cop who has been found guilty of manslaughter is going to jail. She meant to tase him. She actually shot him with a gun, with a real gun with bullets. And if you mention, well, Daunte Wright, he was resisting arrest. Well, he did have a rap sheet a mile long. Well, if he had just kind of gone quietly, if he had just done what he was supposed to do, he wouldn't be dead. If you say that, you're a vicious, evil, terrible monster, racist, whatever. But of course, when it's conservatives, yes, she deserved the bullet because she got in a fight with her husband's ex-wife. She deserved it, of course. Why are they doing this now? Why is the Associated Press going after Ashley Babbitt almost exactly a year after she was killed? Oh, right, that's why. Right. Because tomorrow, January 6th, is the most important feast day in the liberal calendar. This is a sacred, sacred day. It actually is a sacred day tomorrow, by the way, because tomorrow, January 6th for Christians, is the Feast of the Epiphany. This is the feast of Christ presented specifically to the three magi, and this has been celebrated for a very long time. So one way to really get the libs upset is if you say, oh, I love January 6th. I can't wait to celebrate January 6th. January 6th is such a great day. Oh, yes, I'm planning my festivities. I love it. I think it's so wonderful. And then you explain to them that it's the Epiphany. Maybe you're celebrating other things. I don't know. But certainly you could be celebrating the Epiphany. The left has a feast day tomorrow, too. And they need to rewrite the story before the feast day. Their story of what happened on January 6th was fake. It was made up. The Officer Brian Sicknick was attacked with a fire hydrant, and he was killed. Nope, didn't happen. It was an armed insurrection. Nope, it wasn't. None of the people are being charged with insurrection. None of them were armed. They almost took over the country. Nope. They almost raped AOC. AOC wasn't even in the building. They nearly, nope, they didn't. You know what they did? They danced around the Capitol with a horn hat on, and they took Nancy Pelosi's lectern. Not defending it. You shouldn't take people's lecterns. Wasn't the worst insurrection ever. Wasn't the worst insurrection of that year. Actually, not even close to BLM. So they need to rewrite the history, and they're going to go into overdrive to do it. And the reason they're doing that is they recognize that sometimes you hear this phrase, politics is downstream of culture. Okay, whatever that phrase is worth, culture is downstream of religion. All human conflict is theological. All of politics ultimately comes down to religion, whether you want to admit it or not. All of our political debates raise moral questions. Those moral questions have a religious foundation. Our understanding of who we are as individuals, as a community, as a nation, comes down to religious questions. What does it mean to be a man? What are our obligations to our neighbors and ultimately to our God? And the left knows this. And so the left is crafting the religion, the feast days, the liturgical calendar, the secular saints. St. George Floyd is one of the most important saints in the American secular religion. I don't think he's worthy of admiration. Normal people don't think he's worthy of admiration. But that is what the left requires because it serves their political agenda. And so they're going to go into overdrive on January 6th, and there's probably very little that you can do about it. The only way we're going to fight this is not just by saying this is false, this is fake, this is not true. The only way we're going to fight this overwhelming force of religion is by having our own religion. And this is why I jokingly sort of bring up the fact that there is an actual feast tomorrow called the Feast of the Epiphany. You should celebrate it. You should have your own religion. If you want to fight back against the religion of leftism, it's not going to be enough to just poke holes in it. You're going to need your own form of worship. I would recommend the religion that formed our country and our civilization and the whole world, if you ask me, Christianity. But I would recommend that because nature abhors a vacuum, and in the vacuum of belief that exists in America, kooky ideas are going to fill it. What's the old line? When you don't believe in anything, I think it was from Chesterton. When you don't believe in anything, you believe in everything. Because you just become extremely superstitious and gullible. Speaking of crime, there's a new program in New York. New public health program in New York. You know, there's a big drug problem. Leading killer of young Americans. Had over, 100,000 Americans die of drug overdoses, I think, last year? Well, this pilot program is going to install vending machines to give druggies needles and other drugs that will make it easier for them to do drugs without killing themselves by overdosing. They're calling these public health vending machines. I don't think giving syringes to heroin addicts necessarily promotes the public health. It's sort of the opposite of health, you would think. This is being pushed by the Fund for Public Health in New York. They opened a request for these stalls in December, and they're going to offer the overdose drugs and the syringes and, quote, other harm reduction and wellness supplies. Do you think this is compassionate? I don't think this is compassionate. I don't think it's compassionate to create incentives for druggies to do more drugs. Now, their argument is, well, at least they're not using dirty syringes. Yeah, but they're still shooting up a bunch of heroin and other drugs. They're making the problem worse. Yes, well, but look, if they're going to do it, and look, they have the right. They have the right to do what they want with their bodies. And so I think that's what a lot of these people believe. A lot of them are on the legalization train. They think, oh, well, just legalize it, regulate it. People have a right to do drugs. You don't have any right to tell them they can't do drugs. And so we'll just make it a little bit safer. It's a safety issue. The war on drugs failed. They say, you ever hear that? Yeah, I hear this all the time. The war on drugs was a failure. Michael, you're defending the war on drugs? Yes. Yeah, I'm definitely defending the war on drugs. The war on drugs totally worked, okay? From the 1970s to the 1990s, during the height of the war on drugs, use of illegal drugs in the United States dropped precipitously. And then we stopped really enforcing the war on drugs, and guess what happened? The use of illegal drugs skyrocketed, and now we're in the worst opioid crisis ever, and we're in, more broadly, one of the worst drug crises ever, and we've now got 100,000 Americans a year killing themselves on this stuff. So yeah, the war on drugs did work. The pro-drug conservatives are shockingly gullible. They know that the liberal media lie to them about basically everything. They know that the activists and the bureaucrats and the politicians lie to them about almost everything. And yet they think they're telling the truth about the war on drugs. The war on drugs was great. It was awesome. The reason that people oppose it has very little to do with the science, because according to the science, the war on drugs worked. It has to do with this ideology, this obsession with individualism and autonomy, this obsession, this idea. It's not a scientific idea. This is a philosophical idea that you have the right to shoot yourself up with poison. And you don't. You don't.